Hey, I'm James from Smoking Barbecue, and today I am doing my first brisket on the Goldens Cast Iron Kamado. Now, last year when I was doing my first brisket on the Weber Summit Kamado, I went right away to throwing solutions that I've developed over the past decade for Kamado style grills, like my former Big Green Eggs, Kamado Joes, Primo grills, you name it. And I went and tried to throw some of those solutions into the Weber Summit because they're a Kamado, it's a Kamado, and it flat out didn't work. Things like adding wood into the bottom ash collector, it wasn't able to retain enough heat, they didn't burn, I wasn't able to get the smoke profile that I wanted, water pans, you name it. So I need to come up with brand new solutions that address the specific problems of something like the Weber Summit if I want to get a result like I'm more used to in terms of with the hacks that I've done on my Kamado series grills or the benchmark. The reason why I have offset smokers is to use these as a baseline for how close to the pin am I getting. So I'm going to restrain myself from throwing a whole bunch of tricks at the Goldens Cast Iron Kamado like my double indirect or using the dojo or water pans, you name it, and try and stick to a good old-fashioned Kamado brisket so I can see how and where it ranks, and if any of those solutions that I've developed need to be something that I try and incorporate into future briskets. So without further ado, let's get ready, get our brisket ready, and fire up our smoker for today's brisket on the Goldens Cast Iron Kamado. Well, I bet you didn't expect to see this in a brisket trimming video, and that's because I've already covered so many things in terms of my Brisket 101 videos on how to trim. What I want to focus on is something new today that I haven't shared in any other video, and that's paying attention to the ratio of our flat to our point end. Because if we get beyond a certain ratio, it's not turning out the quality brisket that you're after. So for today's brisket, I took a measurement before we trimmed. I was getting a measurement, I'll put it up on the screen because I don't remember it the top of my head, but I think we were about 2 inches for the flat end and just over 5 inches for the point end. So this is giving us a ratio of 2.5 from our flat to our point. And this does not give me the best result. And sometimes this will mean our flat is completely done and our point end is not yet done, and we need to separate those. And so if you're ever in a spot where you find I'm not getting the brisket to be done probe tender in the flat, in the point, this ratio is for you. Where I get the best results is getting in below a 2 ratio, let alone where we ended up today, a 1.7 ratio. This is giving me the ideal flat to point end ratio for nice consistent cooking. And so if you want to remove that much weight, you see in front of me I've got, well, how much weight do I have here in terms of our brisket leftovers? So I did 2 briskets at the exact same time. So this is 6.1 pounds, so about 3 pounds of meat from each brisket. And this is our rendered beef tallow. So you've got about 2.5 pounds. So just about 1.25 pounds of rendered pure beef tallow from each brisket. And so the way to achieve this, I've already done a head-to-head, should you trim, should you not trim your brisket? And I was blown away at just how comparable the results are. So this isn't so much about improving the quality of the brisket in terms of getting those little fine details and scalping the bottom of our brisket, as it is about a simple, repeatable, easy trim method that yields great leftovers as well as even better brisket results when it comes to managing our doneness between our flat as well as our point. So the 2 areas that I targeted for my brisket trim are first, the decal. So this is the really hard fat on the bottom. For me, it's always on the bottom. I like to finish my briskets fat side up. And so starting on the decal, I can get about 1/2 inch to maybe maximum 1 inch of thickness out of the decal. The second area that's never going to turn out, and it also contributes to a lot of extra height, is something called the mohawk, which you can see I actually have sitting right here. And this left in the brisket cook is not only going to potentially burn if we have a lot of over the top heat like you might get on an offset cooker, but even on any other grill like a Kamado or a charcoal grill, you could still be prone to burning this if it's sitting up closer to the top of your grill surface. This also contributes to the wildly different doneness because we get a lot of extra height and thickness, and there is a ton of fat just sitting right below the surface. And so this is going to help make some amazing smash burgers. So make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. So I'm going to show you exactly what my game plan is to do with all of these brisket leftover trims, as well as with all the pure fat. I saved this and threw it in a grill at about 300 degrees Fahrenheit, added 2 to 3 cups of water until almost all the fat was covered, and just let that smoke for about 4 hours until all the water had evaporated and I could strain it off and have some fresh beef tallow for injecting. The rest of our brisket prep was pretty straightforward. I like to use truff hot sauce as a binder. This was on sale at Costco. This stuff is very expensive, so if you find a less expensive alternative, let me know. But what we're really after here is the umami of the truffle oils, and just using this as a gentle binder before adding our rub. This is my latest and greatest homemade rub. If you're looking for that rub recipe, that's now on my website at smokingdadbarbecue.com. I've always been making small little tweaks in my pursuit of perfection, and that's much easier to update a rub recipe there. So if you go there, you're always getting the latest and greatest, versus when I embed them in videos, years go by and they don't have all the latest little tweaks. Plus, if you sign up for the newsletter while you're there, there's a free temperature guide that is no cost, and it comes to you automatically when joining my newsletter. And speaking of my newsletter, if you had been signed up, you would already know about my backyard barbecue rescue series that I'm piloting this year. Super excited, where I'm going out to members who have sent in a note saying, I'm struggling with brisket, I'm struggling with chicken, and I'm going to do a bit of one-on-one coaching with a couple surprise details along the way. So make sure you catch those episodes later this spring when they air. That's it though for our brisket trim. After I had everything trimmed up, put on some truff hot sauce as a binder, added our homemade rub. It was into the refrigerator for an overnight dry brine, meaning all I had to do this morning to get our brisket ready is inject some of the melted tallow back into the flat. This makes a big difference on these Costco briskets. So for me, in the middle of winter where I am, the only grade that is available to me is Select or Choice. There are no prime grade briskets at my Costco location until at least spring. So in order to get a better result, this is where rendering some of the fat that we just trimmed from our brisket can give us, as you saw here, a couple pounds of tallow, and this is more than enough to use a meat injector and put some of that fat back into the flat portion, which will help give us amazing results when this is all said and done. Now that we've got our brisket trimmed and ready to go and you're all caught up on the details, let's fire up our pit. For our cook, I'm going to keep things pretty straightforward. Now, since you can tell there's a bit of condensation snow and the white stuff sitting on our Goldens Cast Iron Kamado, I'm glad I checked. As last night when I was prepping that smoked beef tallow that I used for the injection, I went to open up the grill and see if I could start to get everything ready, since I planned to start this early in the morning. And I'm glad I checked, as my dome had frozen shut to the base. And one of the 5 tips that I include in my grilling and smoking in a Kamado style grill in winter is a fix just for that, where you can add a fire starter or a grill torch into the bottom draft door, get some heat until that ice melts, and I was eventually able to release that. If you're interested in the other top 5 tips for using a Kamado in the winter, be sure to check out that video. I'll put a link to it down below. But once I had access to the grill, I cleaned everything out to get ready for our cook, and I was reminded, this is not full review, and I'm sure they make a tool, I just don't have it, but things like ash removal were evident compared to what I become accustomed to with the integrated all-in-one system in a Kamado Joe, or using one of my favorite discoveries, third-party products last year, something like a kick ash can, where I can just remove all that ash in one step. Getting access below the firebox is a little bit more tricky in the Goldens Cast Iron Kamado, and I even had to use one of my own Kamado Joe ash tools to be able to scrape that out into a bag and try and catch somewhat unsuccessfully as much of the ash as I can. I'll save sort of my full review and do some more tests in the spring, because today is really about focusing on the brisket, but it wasn't something that went by without the observation. The only tweak that I'll make to sort of my drip pan setup is I'm testing a new pan from Kick Ash Baskets. They make a pan with perforated little legs on it that helps hold it up from sitting directly on whatever it is that you're cooking. So if you're using a plate setter on a Big Green Egg, or the ceramic half moons in a Kamado Joe, or this pure cast iron heat deflector, the idea here is if you're doing something where you want to save your drippings and or not have them them burn and put off bad smoke, that you get a little bit of an air gap, and that'll help prevent those drippings from burning. And as I've used a couple of my other pans in recent cooks, they become heat soaked and deformed, and they start to get a little bit of a bowing bubble in them. So that's the only change that I'm going to make today. Plus, since it's low profile, I actually need that reduced height to fit under the grates, between the distance between our cast iron heat deflector as well as our cast iron grates. Everything else I'm going to keep the same. I'm going to place 1 or 2 smoking wood chunks in the bottom, cover that up with some Fogo charcoal, try and keep the variables as few as possible here. Use my Grill Blazer grill gun, fire that up, and let this come up to a temp. And for cook temperatures, I want to ride along between 250 and 270 degrees Fahrenheit until I start to develop our bark, at which point I'll move to a foil boat in order to protect the bottom. Is my suspicion is here there's not a lot of height from our fire, and I don't want to overdo the bottom of our brisket and potentially get some tearing later on for our taste test. That's really it for our cook. The game plan, since I will run out of daylight, is to go for a hot hold, and I'll rejoin you a little bit later on for our taste test. This is the challenge with winter briskets. My tallow is already starting to freeze up, but this still feels really nice to the touch. Let's get some slices, see how we've done. Well, that is one pretty looking brisket. Cover those up with some tallow before it freezes, help them from oxidizing. Get a slice out of our point end, go a little further down into our flat. See how we did on bend test. Oh, it's tender, it wants to break apart. Yeah, I think it's gonna break if I do the fly away. Oh, just barely hanging on, but you get the sense that that is one tender looking brisket. Check our point end. That holds together on its own just fine, dripping with tallow. Cut these into some bite-sized pieces. See how we did. Start with our flat. I didn't have the flavor I was expecting, and by flavor I mean not a lot there. Let me try another piece to see if it was one off. So far, flat is pretty similar in both pieces. Let me try a bit of our point end. Cheers. Well, the point end is obviously point, and that is full of flavor. But on flavor, this is missing some. I've used an analogy before a couple years ago when I did a test on the Kamado Joe Pellet Joe, and I found the briskets came out tasting more like my grandma's pot roast than they do brisket. And this is by no means sort of in the pellet category in a very efficient container, but this tastes like efficiency and not a lot of clean burning fire. By comparison, I didn't mention this earlier, but you might have noticed throughout the video, there was 2 briskets going on at the exact same time, and they finished at the exact same time. So the other one that I did, and this wasn't planned to be a side-by-side comparison, but I'm gonna go grab the other brisket that I did on my Masterbuilt Auto Ignite and do a bit of a blind taste test. Sarah's inside. Let me grab her. I won't tell her which brisket is what, and see if she picks up anything in terms of the flavor between these two, or if it's just my taste buds that are out to lunch today. Be right back. I phoned a friend. Okay, so I promised to tell you which is what, Tourette?
No, I have no clue.
Okay, so we have brisket A, brisket B. I will put up on the screen what's on my left, your right, and my right, your left, so you know which is which. But Sarah, why don't you go ahead and grab a sample from each one. Which one are you starting with?
Okay, I'll start the one on my left.
Okay, grab a piece.
Okay. Yum.
Try and stay close so you can hear the mic.
Well, that's delicious. Flavor's really, really yummy. The bark's pretty good. Okay, so I'll compare it to this one?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So right off the bat, I like the depth of flavor better on the one on my right.
What do you like about it?
The flavor, okay, so normally I don't like a ton of smoke, like everyone knows this. But
Bane of my existence.
in this situation, it really adds to the flavor. Like, it's not too much. It's a really nice depth of flavor. Yeah, it's like it's adding an extra element to it. And the bark I liked on this one as well on the right. It just was nice. It had a good texture and the flavor was yummy. No, they're both delicious, don't get me wrong. It's brisket and you do a good job. See, I can compliment you, not laugh at you all the time. Anyhow. However, I would say between the two, I like the one on the right better.
So now that you, I think, are kind of down the same path, a little bit obvious. So one of these I cooked on a Kamado style grill. The other one I cooked on an auto ignite master built, but I used real wood splits.
Okay.
So if you had to guess now, burning a live fire versus charcoal with some wood for smoke, which one do you think's which?
It would be this one, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thanks for proving I'm not crazy. Let me rejoin you in a second once I get this back inside so it doesn't freeze up for some final thoughts. So that's pretty crazy. If this was a beauty contest, 10 out of 10 times I would have picked the Goldens Kamado for its look. The smoke ring was fantastic. Well, the bark definitely wasn't as dark. It was passable for bark, and everything about that slice in particular looked 10 times better to the eye. But what is under the surface, and you taste this, night and day. And I don't want to make sure I wasn't crazy. The other brisket had been resting inside for the last 45 minutes or so, so it maybe still wasn't as fresh as it could have been, but that didn't even matter. As you saw with Sarah's blind taste test, the flavors come through, and this is where smoke and smoke rings catches so many people up. So much of the focus is on the smoke ring, and you do eat with your eyes, so I can understand why that's part of the appeal, but good quality smoke acts completely different. And so to use the analogy like a salt dry brine, the salt dry brine is where the salt penetrates and goes all the way through into whatever it is we're seasoning versus just sprinkling salt on the surface and eating it. You get a bunch of salt and that dissipates. And that's maybe the best way to describe the smoke between these two different briskets. On my Goldens Cast Iron Kamado, the smoke was like a seasoning on the outside, but inside, kind of bland. It wasn't getting the penetration of the smoke, whereas the master built, while not visually near as good looking, the smoke was all the way through. Now, I opened up the video mentioning I was going to resist the temptation to do everything that I've learned over the past decade of tweaking and modifying my Kamados to turn out the best brisket, because I did that on the Weber Summit and it just didn't work. So things like double indirect or water pans or all those other hooplas, I really just wanted to try the Goldens Cast Iron Kamado right out of the box with a low and slow cook, hoping that perhaps I would find what I really need to work on versus assuming I knew what the problem was and throwing a bunch of potential solutions at it right out of the gate. But now that we have this brisket in hand, this is like a time machine taking me back before we've done any of those other things. We have work to do on increasing the quality of our smoke profile and getting that to penetrate deeper. So when you rejoin me in the future on the Goldens, I'm going to be trying to see which of my tricks that work on ceramic Kamados like Big Green Egg, Kamado Joe's, or Primos transfer just as well into a cast iron Kamado. That's it for today, though. I'm James from Smokin' Dad Barbecue signing off. Remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.